The flight attendant looked him straight in the eye and said, "You can't fly alone." 5 minutes later, she nearly dropped the drinks tray because that same boy was sitting in the cockpit right beside the captain. Stay with this video because what this teen reveals next will leave you stunned. And the truth, it was hidden in plain sight all along. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss one. The airport was crowded and loud, filled with the sound of rolling suitcases, gate announcements, and people hurrying to their flights. Near gate 17, a teenage boy named Tyler Ridge stood calmly beside the first-class boarding lane. He held a small leather duffel in one hand and a crumpled boarding pass in the other. His shoulders were square, his back straight, and his face calm. He didn't have earbuds in or a phone out like most kids his age. Instead, he clutched a worn booklet titled Flight Protocols for Advanced Trainees. The edges were folded from years of use. The gate agent, a younger woman with thick glasses and a clipboard, glanced at Tyler's pass and waved him through with a polite nod. He didn't say much, just thanked her softly and walked down the jet bridge. When he entered the plane, the first-class cabin was nearly empty. Cream leather seats, polished tray tables, and chilled water bottles rested on armrests. He found seat 2. He placed his bag beneath it and quietly sat down. He flipped open the flight booklet and started reading. Across the aisle, a tall flight attendant named Brooke Winslow stood at the front galley, preparing welcome drinks. She was in her late 30s, sharp-featured with a tight bun and stiff posture. Brooke noticed Tyler and frowned. She didn't recognize him as one of the unaccompanied minors noted on her roster. Her heels clicked as she walked over. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped. "Are you waiting for your parents?" Tyler looked up, his expression polite but puzzled. "No, I'm flying alone." Brooke's eyebrows lifted. "Alone in first class." She said it like it was a joke. He nodded and handed her his boarding pass. She looked it over slowly, then looked back at him. "First class isn't for solo minors. That's not allowed without direct supervision, airline policy." He kept his voice steady. "My guardian approved this. It was booked weeks ago." Brooke folded the ticket and dropped it on his tray. "That doesn't change the fact that you can't stay here." Her voice was louder now. A few passengers had begun to listen. "You need to move to economy." Now Tyler looked around, unsure whether to argue or stay silent. After a few seconds, he picked up his bag and stood. A man sitting in seat 2, C mid-40s, dark sweater, leaned over to Brooke. "He had a first-class pass," he muttered. "What's the issue?" Brooke ignored the comment. "Let's go," she said firmly to Tyler. She led him past curious faces all the way to the last row of the plane, middle seat between a sleeping college student and a woman with a crying baby. She pointed to it without a word. He sat down. Quiet, calm, no protest. The moment he buckled in, Tyler reached for his flight manual again and flipped to a page labeled Emergency Procedures, Runway Failures. He read with quiet focus, even as a tray of juice spilled across the aisle and a toddler screamed behind him. He didn't seem angry, just still, observing, waiting, and no one, not even Brooke, realized who he was or what he was about to do. The cabin slowly filled with passengers, each dragging carry-ons and adjusting seats. The overhead bins slammed shut one by one. In the back row, Tyler stayed quiet, his manual open across his lap. A flight attendant named Dana, younger than Brooke and far softer in presence, walked by and glanced at him. She paused briefly, noticing the title of the booklet in his lap. "That's not something most kids read," she said with a small smile. Tyler nodded but didn't offer anything more. Meanwhile, Brooke stood near the cockpit reviewing last-minute paperwork. The captain, a tall man named Owen Reeves, with silver at his temples, and a calm voice, stepped out for a moment to check with the crew. As he passed Dana, she whispered, "That kid in the last row, he's got some kind of pilot manual with him." Owen looked over toward the back briefly. "Where's he seated?" he asked. "Back row, middle." She replied, "But he had a first-class pass." Brooke moved him. Owen's brow furrowed. He nodded once, said nothing more, and walked back into the cockpit. Back in first class, a passenger who had witnessed the earlier exchange, a woman named Helena Forbes, early 50s, wearing a pearl scarf, pulled Brooke aside. "That boy had a ticket, didn't he?" she asked quietly. "I saw the print on it, too." Brooke gave a tight smile. It's airline policy minors can't sit alone up front. Liability. Helena's eyes narrowed. Funny, my son flew solo. In first class when he was 12. No one stopped him. Brooke's smile faded, but she turned away before responding. She headed straight for the galley and picked up the intercom. Cabin secure, she said through gritted teeth, trying to mask her growing discomfort. But her eyes kept drifting to the back of the plane. Tyler, unaware of the conversation surrounding him, had closed his manual. He leaned back, adjusted the air nozzle above him, and pulled out a second item from his bag, a metal card with a silver insignia. He flipped it between his fingers, smooth and practiced. The flight crew didn't see it not yet, but they would soon. Then a sudden tone rang through the aircraft. The captain's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing a short delay before taxiing due to last-minute clearance protocols. We appreciate your patience. In the cockpit, Owen Reeves reached for the cabin phone. Get that kid back up here, he said. Right now, Dana moved quickly through the aisle, her eyes scanning each row until she reached the back. Tyler was seated just as before, calm, straight-backed, and still holding the silver insignia card in his hand. She crouched beside him, lowering. Her voice, Tyler Ridge, she asked carefully. He looked at her and nodded. The captain would like to see you, she said, her tone gentle, but now more respectful. Tyler stood without a word, tucked the manual and card into his jacket, and followed her quietly toward the front of the aircraft. As they made their way forward, several passengers glanced up. A man in business class raised an eyebrow. In first class, Helena leaned forward, watching closely. Brooke noticed the movement in the aisle and stepped directly into their path. Where are you taking him? She asked sharply. Arms folded, Dana kept her voice level. Captain Reeves called for him. Brooke looked from Dana to Tyler, clearly unsettled. For what? This child's been moved already. He's not even supposed to be. The cockpit door clicked open. Captain Reeves stepped out halfway. Brooke, he said evenly, I requested his presence. That'll be all. Brooke hesitated but said nothing, her cheeks visibly flushing. Dana guided Tyler past her and into the cockpit. The door closed behind them. Inside the cockpit, it was quiet but tense. Co-pilot Mitch Harrison, in his early 40s, glanced back and gave a slight nod of recognition. There you are, Mitch said. Was wondering when they'd let you up. Captain Reeves offered Tyler a seat behind the center console. Not in a passenger chair, but in a folding jump seat reserved for authorized personnel. Tyler took it without needing instruction. You doing okay? Reeves asked, adjusting a knob on the center panel. Yes, sir, Tyler replied, cool and composed. The captain glanced at Mitch, then reached into his own bag and pulled out a small identification folder, nearly identical to the one Tyler had been holding. You still carrying yours? He asked. Tyler opened his jacket and handed over the silver card. It wasn't a toy or even a training badge. It was a junior aviation specialist authorization issued under a rare mentorship program tied to the Federal Aviation Administration, granted only to teens with log simulator hours, written exams, and verified instructor endorsement. There were fewer than 30 issued nationwide. Reeves smiled faintly. Didn't think I'd see you back so soon. He looked down the checklist. You want to help run pre-check with Mitch? Tyler nodded once. Yes, sir. Outside the cockpit, Brooke stood frozen near the galley, her expression blank, but her ears burning. She had just witnessed a minor she had dismissed take a seat inside the cockpit beside two senior pilots. Behind her, Helena watched with a cold gaze. That boy belongs up there, Helena said quietly, just loud enough for Brooke to hear. Not shoved between a crying baby and a tray cart. Brooke turned her face stiff and muttered something under her breath. Then she made her way quickly down the aisle to the back of the plane, as if trying to escape the eyes now beginning to turn toward her. Passengers whispered first in scattered pairs, then in groups of 3 or 4. The murmurs swelled slowly like a wave moving forward from the rear. Someone had seen the badge Tyler carried, another had recognized the captain's tone. A man in 4C was already typing something on his phone, preparing a social media post. In the cockpit, Tyler sat calmly beside Mitch, reading through the digital checklist on a mounted screen. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't rise. Mitch gave him a side glance. impressed but unsurprised. As sharper than some of the cadets I've trained. Mitch whispered to Reeves. The captain nodded. That's why he's on board. Reeves reached for the cabin phone and pressed the key to ring the lead attendant. Brooks' voice answered, forced and tight. Yes, Captain, reassign that passenger to his original seat in first class. Reeves said. Now he didn't raise his voice, but every word felt like steel. And well, be discussing your conduct after landing with the director. There was a long pause. Understood, Brooke finally said. Her hand trembled as she hung up the phone. Brooke's hand hovered in the air. After hanging up the receiver, her face pale, jaw clenched. She hadn't expected the call, certainly not that tone. The captain had never spoken to her that way in over 9 years of flying. She stared at the intercom panel for a moment too long, the quiet pressure of humiliation blooming across her chest. When she turned around, her composure cracked further as she met the stares of multiple passengers, subtle but undeniable. Some quickly looked away. Others didn't bother hiding their frowns. She straightened her blazer and walked back toward the rear of the plane, her heels clicking against the narrow aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last. A woman in row 19 gave her a sharp glance. A man in 18A leaned into the aisle slightly to follow her with his eyes. She had always felt in control, on a flight in command of the cabin of the service of the rules. But something had shifted, and now she felt like every movement was being judged. Tyler was still in the cockpit when the captain called back to Mitch, asking him to escort the boy to his original seat. Mitch gave Tyler a quiet nod. Let's get you settled up front again. Tyler adjusted his jacket and followed the co-pilot out of the cockpit. Mitch didn't say much as they walked together, but the small gesture walking beside him like a colleague, not like a child, said everything. As they approached the first-class section, the low buzz of conversation halted, eyes turned. Passengers leaned back or looked up over their newspapers and tablets. When Brooke caught sight of them coming down the aisle together, her stomach twisted. Mitch stopped just short of seat 2A and gestured to it. You're back where you belong, he said, his voice casual but full of intention. Tyler nodded, placed his bag under the seat, and sat down quietly. Brooke stood near the galley, unsure if she should say something, apologize or vanish. She did none of the three. Her face tightened as she turned away, pretending to adjust the beverage cart. From across the cabin, Helena Forbes, still seated in 1C, gave a small approving nod. She turned to the man beside her and whispered, They corrected it. Took long enough? The man raised an eyebrow. Who is that kid? Helena didn't answer right away. She just watched Tyler as he took out the flight protocol booklet again and calmly resumed reading. Someone they clearly underestimated, she said. Meanwhile, in row 4, a young woman in a blazer had begun typing rapidly on her phone. The message was short: teen humiliated by flight attendant for flying alone in first class. Turns out he's the co-pilot's FAA trainee captain. Just reinstated him. Whole cabin saw it. She hit send and watched the post upload to her page. Within seconds, reactions began rolling in. Brooke could feel the temperature in the room shift. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the weight of every glance, every half-whisper, every silence that had meaning. And for once, there was nothing she could say that would make it disappear. She was no longer the authority figure she had built herself up to be. Her decision was unraveling in front of a full aircraft. In the flight deck, Captain Reeves adjusted his headset and checked the remaining pre-flight items. Tell ops we're ready, he said to ground control. He paused for a beat, then added under his breath, Finally, outside the window, the jet bridge began to pull away. Back in first class, Tyler kept his eyes on the page in front of him. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk. He simply read, focused and calm, as though nothing had happened, as though he had always known this seat was his. And the thing was, he had. The aircraft began its slow crawl away from the gate, the familiar rumble beneath the cabin floor masking the tension that lingered in the air. As the engines hummed to life, passengers began settling into their routine, adjusting headrests, pulling out tablets, and flipping through in-flight magazines. But the earlier incident hadn't been forgotten. Conversations were quieter now, but they had shifted in tone. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace. It was watching, waiting. Tyler sat in too. His legs crossed neatly, the worn aviation booklet resting open on his lap. He wasn't pretending to be calm, he simply was. He stared out the window, eyes following the tarmac lines like they were familiar roads. Occasionally he'd glance down and study the checklist. Printed on page 17, engine failure protocols, dual pilot response. His fingers moved along the margins, tracing the notes he had written in pencil months ago. Across the aisle, Helena watched him carefully. Not with pity but curiosity. "I've flown over 70 times in the past 10 years. She whispered to the man next to her, "And I've never seen anything like that." The man nodded, still glancing back toward the galley where Brooke stood motionless, pretending to organize beverage trays she had already arranged twice. Brooke's usual poise was gone. She leaned against the galley counter, staring at the silver trim of the coffee pot without seeing it. She knew the captain had filed the incident. She knew the boy's full name was probably in a company-wide system by now. But worse than the official blowback was the growing sense that everyone had seen her for what she'd done. Not a mistake, not an error in seat assignment, an assumption she had assumed he didn't belong. And now every person in first class had silently logged that fact. Dana walked in from the mid-cabin section, her posture relaxed but her eyes focused. Ready for service, she asked. Brooke didn't respond right away. "Brooke," Dana repeated a little more firmly. Brooke blinked and looked up. "Yeah," she said quickly. "I'm fine." She moved past Dana and pushed the cart forward toward the aisle, but her usual confidence was missing. Her steps were slower, her eyes lower. When she reached Tyler's row, she stopped awkwardly beside him. "Would you like a drink?" she asked. Tyler looked up, surprised to hear her speak. "Water, please," he said quietly. She poured a glass from the bottle on the top shelf, handed it to him with a trembling hand. "I apologize," she said under her breath. About earlier, she didn't meet his eyes. Tyler took the water. "Thanks," he replied, simple and soft, but nothing more. He didn't say it was okay. He didn't say he understood. And somehow that silence felt louder than anything he could have said. Brooke turned quickly and moved on to the next row. Her neck flushed red. Further up the aisle, a middle-aged man in a sports coat opened his phone and refreshed his feed. "Hey," he whispered to his wife. "The kid's on Twitter already. Look." He tilted the screen. A post with Tyler's photo from earlier in Coach had gone semi-viral. The caption, "Kicked out of first class for flying alone." Now he's co-piloting the flight. Whole cabin is watching this unfold. It already had over 3,000 shares. Dana, who overheard, walked up the aisle to Helena and passed her a note discreetly. "Has been cleared to sit up front again. Anytime Captain said he wants him in the cockpit before descent," she whispered. Helena nodded solemnly. In the cockpit, Captain Reeves had already received 2 messages from airline operations. One was routine flight timing landing slot. The other was more loaded. Confirm incident report on Ridge minor statement. Needed before arrival. CEO alert has been triggered. He leaned back in his seat, sighing through his nose. "So they're watching now," he muttered. Mitch nodded. Words out, back in the cabin. The plane climbed smoothly through the cloud line. Tyler sipped his water, then returned to his notes. One page held a diagram of instrument clusters, the other bullet points underlined in pen. He didn't seem concerned about the whispers or the stares anymore. He didn't seem like he was holding a grudge. But his calmness wasn't surrender, it was control. Quiet, focused, earned control. And Brooke, who now kept looking over her shoulder every few minutes, was just beginning to feel what it meant to lose it. At 35,000 feet, the cabin settled into a false sense of calm. Overhead lights dimmed, the window shades closed one by one. Most passengers leaned back in their seats, scrolling through their screens or flipping to the in-flight movie. But underneath the hush, the quiet tension still pulsed. Brooke continued her service rounds with a mechanical politeness. She poured drinks, handed out pretzels, nodded at requests, but her mind wasn't in any of it. She kept glancing toward the front. Every time Tyler lifted his cup or reached into his bag, her breath caught, waiting for another twist she couldn't control. Her rhythm was off. She dropped a napkin, spilled tonic water on a businessman's pants. Forgot one couple's dinner tray completely. Dana, working further down the aisle, noticed but said nothing yet. She just watched, filing it all away in seat 2. Tyler placed his aviation manual back into his bag and unzipped a side pocket. From it, he pulled a slim tablet with a black case and quietly unlocked the screen. It was synced with simulator training logs, not a game, not a hobby app, but real data logged from hours in FAA-certified flight programs. He scrolled through recorded sessions, reviewed past checklists, and tapped open a new lesson titled Cockpit Communication During Disruption. His finger hovered over the screen. He paused, then locked the tablet again and placed it face down beside him. A few rows back, Helena Forbes continued to observe, shed-flown with generals and governors over the years, and something about the way Tyler carried himself unsettled her. Not because he was intimidating, but because he was unlike anyone his age she'd ever seen on a flight. Most teens squirmed in. Coach complained about legroom snuck sips from energy drinks. Tyler had been yanked from his seat, humiliated in front of strangers, and still managed to move with grace. She had seen grown men collapse under less. She picked up her phone and typed a short message to her friend on the board of directors at the airline. Heads up, something happened on Flight 417. You're going to want the cabin report, passenger name Tyler Ridge. She didn't expect an immediate reply, but she knew the ripple had started. Meanwhile, in the galley, Brooke leaned heavily against the counter. Her hands gripped the metal edge, knuckles white. She reached for the service phone, pressed the code for the cockpit, and waited. Captain Reeves answered. "Yes, I need to speak with you," she said, barely managing to keep her voice from shaking. "He'll be out in a few," the captain replied evenly. "Well, talk after second service." Brooke hung up slowly, her fingers trembling. She had convinced herself that if she kept her head down and stuck to routine, this could blow over. But it wasn't going to. The captain's tone wasn't angry, it was worse. Detached professional final. Near the rear of the aircraft, Dana moved between rows, checking on passengers. As she returned to the galley for more water bottles, she caught Brooke staring into space again. "You okay?" Dana asked. "I'm fine." Brooke snapped quickly, then softer. "I'm just tired." Dana studied her for a moment. "You sure that's all?" Brooke didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began rearranging already stacked cups. Dana gave a small nod to herself and walked away. Across the aisle, a man in 3D lowered his headphones and whispered to his seatmate. "Is that the kid who was moved?" The woman nodded. "I think he's some kind of trainee. Did you see him go into the cockpit?" The whispers were no longer about curiosity. They had shifted to concern, not for Tyler, but for what this meant. People had seen the way he was treated, and now they knew who he was, and most importantly, who he was connected to. Tyler sat still, back straight, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't pretending to be calm for the sake of image. He had trained himself to stay that way. His instructors had drilled it into him: a good pilot breathes slower when the room gets tighter. He had learned early that being underestimated was common and often useful. "Let them think you're a kid," he remembered one mentor saying. "It only gives you more room to prove them wrong," and today it was working better than he expected. Back in the cockpit, Captain Reeves leaned toward Mitch. "We'll give him another half hour, then bring him in again for the landing review." Mitch nodded. "Think corporate's watching this already." Reeves gave a short breath. "They're not just watching, they're waiting for us to land." Mitch looked down at the message thread from HQ1. Unread email glowed at the top. Subject: URGENT Ridge Incident. Executive review pending. Mitch whistled under his breath. "They're going to want every second of this flight accounted for." "They'll get it," Reeves replied, "every second, and they'll learn what it looks like when one of their own is treated like baggage." At 37,000 feet, surrounded by steel clouds and silence, everyone on board had started to realize this flight was no longer routine, and for Brooke, routine was the one thing she no longer had. An hour into the flight, the lights dimmed further as the cabin crew prepared for evening service. But the tension hadn't faded, it had only gone quiet. The kind of quiet that carries weight, the kind that clings to walls and follows every footstep. Tyler sat in his seat with a small notebook open, now jotting down neat rows of numbers and codes in blue pen. His mind wasn't on the food service or the growing whispers. He was reviewing simulated traffic patterns for descent in variable winds, something he'd been practicing for months. The rest of the cabin had no idea what he was doing, but the calm in his body language made them glance at him now and then, more out of curiosity than discomfort. He didn't shrink from the attention. He didn't look for it either. Near the rear galley, Brooke had pulled Dana aside under the pretense of reviewing the second service protocol, but it quickly turned into something else. Have you ever been written up? Brooke asked quietly, not making eye contact. Dana blinked, caught off guard. No. Why? Brooke's eyes darted toward the front. Captain said he's filing something. I don't know how bad it'll be. Dana crossed her arms, choosing her words carefully. What exactly happened between you and the kid before boarding? I told him he couldn't sit in first class alone. I've done that. Before, it's always been fine. Brooke's voice wavered between defensiveness and regret. But this time he wasn't just a passenger, Dana said softly. I didn't know that. Brooke replied quickly. He looked. I thought he was someone trying to sneak in. Dana tilted her head. Did he give you a reason to think that? Or did you just assume Brooke's silence was answer enough? Dana sighed and stepped back. You know the training we're supposed to verify before taking action. Quietly, privately, you didn't even give him space to explain. I made a mistake. Brooke snapped a little too loud. A passenger turned to glance at them from row 25. Brooke lowered her voice again. But now I feel like they're treating me like I did it on purpose. Dana didn't say more. She just turned and walked back to the aisle, shaking her head. Up front, Helena Forbes reached for the in-flight call button, but stopped halfway. Instead, she stood from her seat and walked calmly toward the cockpit. Before she reached the door, Captain Reeves stepped out as if he'd anticipated her arrival. Miss Forbes, he said with a nod. I thought you should know, she said quietly. The passengers are talking a lot. There's already a post going around about this flight. Photos, names, people are watching. The captain didn't look surprised. That was expected. Helena studied him. That boy Tyler, he handled what happened with more grace than most adults I know. But Brooke, she paused, lowering her voice further. If she's left to deal with this on her own without support, it's going to blow back on everyone, including him. Captain Reeves crossed his arms. This isn't just about discipline, it's about culture. She made an assumption, acted publicly, and doubled down when challenged. The issue isn't the punishment, it's what gave her the confidence to do it in front of a full cabin. Helena nodded. I agree. Just make sure when you land the focus stays on what matters. He doesn't need to be a symbol. He just needs to be treated like any other trained young professional. With respect, the captain offered a quiet smile. You've flown with us before, haven't you? More times than I can count, she replied. Then you'll know we don't let things slide. He turned slightly. We're bringing Tyler into the cockpit again before descent. I want the passengers to see it. All of them, not to shame her, but to shift the tone. Helena returned to her seat, and moments later the cockpit door opened again. Dana walked up the aisle with a quiet nod to Tyler. The captain would like you up front, she said gently. Tyler stood and grabbed his bag. This time no one looked away. All eyes followed him as he walked the aisle, his expression steady, his steps slow and composed. A boy in 14D leaned toward his father. Is he the pilot? The father smiled faintly. Not yet. As Tyler entered the cockpit once again, Brooke stood in the galley watching him disappear through the heavy door. Her hands were folded in front of her, but her fingers twitched. She had once believed the uniform alone gave her authority, but now it was clear real. Authority didn't come from rules or seniority or even experience. It came from presence, and Tyler had it, and this time no one could take that from him. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was focused but calm. Tyler stood just behind the captain's seat as the plane leveled into cruise altitude. The sunset outside the front windows lit the space with a low amber glow, casting shadows over the buttons and screens that blinked quietly across the control panel. Captain Reeves turned slightly in his seat and gave Tyler a small nod. Ready to walk through descent prep? Yes, sir, Tyler replied. The co-pilot Mitch handed Tyler a laminated checklist. Tyler took it with ease, already familiar with the layout, and began reading aloud in a steady, practiced voice. Each line was delivered with quiet precision. Fuel flow check, pressurization, lock, auto brake setting. Mitch responded with acknowledgments. Reeves marked values. The three of them moved like a quiet machine, with no wasted movements, no chatter. Outside the cockpit, the murmurs continued to spread. A passenger in business class filmed a short clip, not of Tyler's face, but of the closed cockpit door, with a caption, "Kid in the pilot seat." Not a prank. Full flight, staff dead silent. The post joined the growing string of updates that had already begun spreading beyond the airplane. By now, executives at the airline's headquarters had flagged Flight 417 in their system. Internal emails flew from communications to legal, from legal to operations. A supervisor named Rachel, who managed flight experience policy, was already piecing together preliminary facts. Passenger Tyler Ridge, age 15, FAA certified junior aviation trainee guardian. Listed as Captain Owen Reeves, incident, reassigned without cause from first class. Flight attendant involved, Brooke Winslow. She sent her summary to the director of policy with a note. This one isn't going to disappear quietly. Recommend immediate prep for statement. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, Brooke's hands were starting to ache from how tightly she gripped the edge of the beverage cart. She hadn't moved from the galley in over 20 minutes. Every time she considered walking the aisle, something held her back. It wasn't the passengers, it was herself. Her own voice echoed in her mind on a loop. "You can't fly alone." That line, loud, condescending, spoken for the entire first-class cabin to hear, had become the rope tightening around her reputation. Dinah noticed she returned from checking on row 18 and approached slowly. "You should take a break," she said gently. "I'm fine," Brooke replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, you're not," Donna said, not unkindly. "And honestly, Brooke, I think this is one of those times where pretending doesn't help." Brooke didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead, watching the reflection of her own stiff posture in the stainless steel panel beside her. Further up the aisle, Helena quietly drafted an email to a longtime acquaintance at the Civil Aviation Training Board. She didn't include photos or gossip, just a name, a flight number, and the words, "There's a kid you should know about. Has not loud, has not flashy, but he's got something rare." In the cockpit, Tyler had just completed the last item on the checklist. The captain turned toward him with a nod of respect. "How's it feel to sit here again?" Tyler looked down at the instruments for a long second before answering. "Like I never left." Captain Reeves cracked a faint smile. "Good answer." Then he added, "You know what I want you to do when we land? Stay in the cockpit until passengers disembark." "No," Reeves said, shaking his head. "I want you to walk out with me. Through the aisle with your head high. Everyone deserves to see what professionalism actually looks like. And more importantly, what it doesn't." Tyler hesitated, not out of fear, but thoughtfulness. "If I do that, it'll make things harder for her," he said without naming. Brooke Reeves gave a small sigh. "Maybe, but that part's not your responsibility. She made her choice. Now we make ours." Tyler nodded, then returned his focus to the display screen in front of him. Outside, the last light of day dipped below the horizon, turning the clouds into a smear of purple and gold. Back in the cabin, passengers began preparing for landing. Seat backs clicked upright, trays folded in. The tension that had held since takeoff began to shift, not dissolve, but transform. They had all witnessed something unusual, not dramatic, not explosive, just quietly unforgettable. Brooke stood near the front, her shoulders hunched slightly, her fingers twitching near the intercom. She wasn't sure what she would say. She wasn't even sure she would be allowed to say anything. In all her years flying, she had never felt more off balance, not because she had been challenged, but because she had been wrong. And for the first time, everyone knew it. And Tyler, the boy she had dismissed without a second thought, had said nothing unkind to her. Made no scene, offered no smug glances. He had simply flown better than anyone else on board. As the flight began its slow descent, the cabin lights dimmed further, casting a soft amber glow across the rows. The voice of Captain Reeves came through the speaker, steady and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Charlotte. Please return your seat backs and tray tables to the upright position. Cabin crew prepare for landing." Passengers stirred, some stretching their legs, others tucking away tablets and books. But more than a few glanced toward the front of the plane, toward the closed cockpit door, their minds still caught on the quiet revelation of the flight Tyler Ridge. The boy who had been humiliated in front of the entire cabin only hours before now sat behind that door calmly assisting two senior pilots with landing procedures. Most of the passengers didn't know exactly what his training entailed. The certifications, the log simulator hours, the mentoring program. But they didn't need the paperwork. His presence had said enough. His quiet confidence had done more to change minds than any badge or uniform. And now they waited not out of fear, but out of respect. Brooke Winslow stood in the forward galley, her back rigid against the wall. Her eyes stayed locked on the rows ahead, though her gaze had long since turned inward. She had memorized every detail of the incident, every word she had said, but none more than the sentence she now couldn't seem to outrun. You can't fly alone. She had said it as a warning, a dismissal, and now it echoed back at her with painful clarity. Not because of who Tyler turned out to be, but because of who she hadn't allowed herself to see in the first place. Her authority, once so automatic, now felt fragile. And it wasn't just the looming disciplinary report or the whispers from corporate. It was the quiet judgment of the passengers, the shift in how they looked at her. No eye contact, no friendly banter. Just distance, like the space between her and the boy she'd wrongly removed had grown into something much larger than a row of seats. Dana walked past her checking latches and instructing passengers to buckle up. She paused briefly near Brooke but said nothing. Her silence wasn't cruel. It was tired. Tired of watching someone refuse to take responsibility. Tired of watching the truth unfold while the person at the center of it refused to face it. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Tyler sat once again behind the center console, now observing the descent patterns displayed on the main screen. He followed along as Mitch adjusted the autopilot and Captain Reeves relayed instructions to air traffic control. Your call, Reeves said quietly. You want to ride it out with us or disembark with the passengers? Tyler looked down, then back up. I think it's better if I walk out. Good, Reeves replied. That's what I hoped you'd say. Outside, the city lights of Charlotte twinkled against the dark horizon as the plane cut gently through the descending layers of clouds. The runway lights grew larger and clearer, a ribbon of yellow threading through the dark. Inside the cabin, a hush fell again, the kind that came before something meaningful. The wheels touched down smoothly, the faint bump barely registering beneath their feet. Passengers looked up from their seats, not in surprise, but with subtle acknowledgement. They had landed, yes, but something more had also arrived. As the plane taxied to the gate, Dana gave her final safety reminders over the speaker, her voice clear and direct. Brooke stood off to the side, barely moving. The cockpit door remained closed for now, but the anticipation was thick. When the plane came to a full stop, the seatbelt signs turned off with a soft chime. A rustling of seatbelts followed, but unlike most flights, no one jumped to their feet. People stayed seated, watching, waiting. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Reeves stepped out, first followed by Mitch. Behind them walked Tyler, bag over his shoulder posture, upright, face calm. There were no theatrics, no dramatic pauses, just a quiet walk down the aisle side by side with the two pilots who had trusted him all along. The passengers didn't cheer. They didn't clap, but heads turned, and one by one people made space. They stood aside, nodded. A few whispered, "Good job," or "You handled that well." Others simply watched in silence. When Tyler passed row 2, Helena looked up and said softly, "You did more than fly. You taught." He nodded once but kept walking. As they reached the aircraft door, Brooke was still standing by the exit. Her face was drained of color, her posture stiff. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Tyler didn't stop. He didn't look at her. He stepped onto the jet bridge beside Captain Reeves, and together they walked into the terminal. Only after they were gone did Brooke finally move. Not to follow, not to apologize, but to retreat into the galley, her shoulders folding inward, her silence complete. And all around her the cabin emptied, not just of passengers, but of belief in the person she used to be. In the terminal, the buzz was immediate. A few passengers who had deplaned ahead of Tyler were already standing near the windows, glancing back at the jet bridge as if waiting for confirmation of what they'd just witnessed. Others walked ahead, but whispered to each other with wide eyes and hushed tones. Several opened their phones, mid-stride scrolling through Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, finding versions of the same story that had already gone viral before the plane touched the ground. Tyler Ridge stepped into the terminal, flanked by Captain Reeves and co-pilot Mitch. Not as a child walking off a flight, but as someone who had earned the quiet respect of a full cabin. His face didn't show pride or victory, just the same steady calm that had carried him through every moment of the day. A man from Seat 3D approached as they walked toward the baggage claim. "Hey, just wanted to say," he paused, unsure how to finish. "You handled that better than I would. Better than most adults I know." Tyler nodded and offered a simple, "Thank you." The man stepped aside and let them pass. A few more steps forward, and a woman in a green blazer, who had sat mid-cabin, caught up to them. "My son's 11, she said to Reeves, eyes on Tyler. "Has obsessed with flying." "Hell, want to know your name?" Reeves gave her a warm smile, but let Tyler speak for himself. "Tyler Ridge," he said quietly. The woman smiled, his going to remember that by the time they reached the baggage carousel, a small cluster had formed not to crowd him, but to observe from a distance. Some took photos discreetly, though none were intrusive. They simply wanted to capture what felt like a rare moment, a boy quietly setting an example in a world too used to noise. Captain Reeves stepped aside to take a call, as Tyler and Mitch waited near the bags. The call was short but sharp. The voice on the other end belonged to a senior director from airline operations. "We've received the incident log. The footage confirms the interaction. Passenger Ridge is on our approved minor pilot development list. The board has been alerted." Reeves didn't flinch. "I assumed as much." The director hesitated, then added, "We're drafting a statement. Corporate communications wants to know if Ridge's family is reachable for approval." "Has not looking for attention," Reeves said. "Has looking to be taken seriously. Big difference." After a beat of silence, the voice replied, "Understood." Reeves hung up, looked toward Tyler, and saw something he hadn't expected. The boy had finally dropped his shoulders, not in exhaustion, but in relief. The hard part was over, or so he thought. Back on the aircraft, the final passengers had exited. Dana remained to complete post-flight checks, but Brooke stood motionless, near the galley, eyes locked on the floor. Her uniform, usually pristine, now felt stiff and uncomfortable. She barely noticed as two men in dark jackets boarded the plane from the jet bridge. "Brooke Winslow?" one of them asked. She turned slowly. "Yes, we're from Flight Operations Compliance. We'll need you to stay aboard for a formal report." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Dana stood nearby, watching with a mix of unease and resignation. She'd suspected something like this was coming, but seeing it play out still made her stomach twist. The compliance officers moved toward the cockpit, asking for the flight log. Brooke remained still, staring at the empty rows of seats, the very rows where she had once felt in control. It struck her all at once how fast power could shift when it was built on shaky ground. Dana approached cautiously. "Do you want me to wait with you?" Brooke shook her head slowly. "No, you should go." Dana gave a short nod and stepped off the plane. As she entered the terminal, she passed by a group of employees standing near Gate 19. Looking at a tablet screen, she glanced over just long enough to see a headline already populating news feeds. "Young aviation trainee removed from first class. Later revealed as airline mentors, co-pilot flight crew. Under review after unjustified reassignment of FAA-certified minor." Below the title was a photo someone had snapped during disembarkation. Tyler walking between Captain Reeves and Mitch, his bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes ahead. Dana's heart sank a little. Not for the airline, but for Brooke. There was no recovering from this kind of thing without facing it. Hedden and Brooke had spent the entire flight trying to avoid it. Meanwhile, at the Ridge residence just outside Raleigh, Tyler's older sister, Amanda, sat scrolling through social media with wide eyes. She hadn't heard from him yet, but her screen told her more than she expected. Post after post described the incident. Photos, videos, comments of disbelief and outrage. And beneath it all, an emerging thread, people demanding the airline change how it trained its staff. When Amanda's phone rang and Tyler's name flashed across the screen, she answered on the first ring. "Hey," he said. "I've been reading about you for the past 10 minutes, she replied. "Are you okay?" "Am fine," he said. "We just landed." "I can't believe what they did," she said, her voice sharpening. "You had a first-class ticket. You've been training for over a year. Your FAA logged. How could they just?" Tyler interrupted gently. Amanda, it's done. The captain handled it. Everyone saw what they needed to see. Amanda fell silent for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you want me to post something? Say anything." Tyler thought about that. Then with his usual steady tone said, "No, I'd rather let the truth speak for itself." And it had in terminals on screens across group chats and message boards. The story was already flying further than he ever could have imagined. And he hadn't said a word within the hour. The airline's headquarters in Atlanta was lit well past closing. The top floor buzzed with tension. A row of suited executives sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. Their faces lit not by office lights but by glowing laptops and phone screens. A large display in the center of the room cycled through screenshots from social media posts, flight logs, and incident summaries. At the head of the table sat CEO Lauren Kessler, calm on the outside but with a look that made everyone shift nervously in their chairs. She looked at the head of public relations. How bad the PR lead didn't blink. Over 9 million impressions in 5 hours. Posts from passengers are consistent. Video clips show the boy being asked to leave first class. Another shows him walking with the pilots. One blog already confirmed he's part of our junior aviation pathway program. And the flight attendant Lauren asked identified Brooke Winslow, 10-year veteran, no previous formal complaints, but 3 warnings for poor conflict handling. Never documented at this level. Until now, Lauren leaned back in her chair, lips pressed into a thin line, and the boy. The head of flight operations pulled up a new file. Tyler Ridge, 15 years old, enrolled in FAO certified early pilot training. Guardian listed as Captain Owen Reeves, one of ours. Kids got over 200 simulator hours logged, approved for cockpit shadowing under supervision. Everything in his record is clean. Stellar. Even Lauren tapped her pen against the desk slowly, deliberately. So we not only mistreated a passenger, we humiliated one of our own future pilots in front of a plane full of customers, and then let him quietly correct our error like a professional, while the adult in uniform melted down in front of everyone. The room fell still. From across the table, a legal advisor spoke up. Technically, the airline didn't violate policy, but the optics, this isn't going to blow over with a statement alone. Lauren stood and walked slowly toward the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. Then we don't give them a statement, she said firmly. We give them change. Everyone looked up. We'll need a 3-point action plan by tomorrow, full audit of our cabin crew training programs, clear updates to how unaccompanied minors, especially credentialed ones, are handled. And I want a direct apology issued to Tyler Ridge and his family. Private first, then public, the PR director. Cleared her throat. Would you consider inviting him here to headquarters? Lauren didn't hesitate. Yes, make it happen quietly. No media. No press wall. If this kid is going to fly our plane someday, he deserves to see who's behind the ones he's trusting now. Back in Charlotte, Tyler sat quietly in the back seat of the rideshare, watching the city lights slide past the window. Captain Reeves rode beside him, not speaking unless Tyler did. There was no need for words. The day had spoken enough. As they neared the hotel, Reeves finally broke the silence. They'll probably call you tomorrow. Tyler didn't ask who he knew. The executives, the communications people. Maybe even someone from the board. The thought didn't make him nervous. It just made him tired. He leaned his head against the window. I didn't want this, he said softly. All I wanted was to fly. Learn, sit quietly and learn. Reeves nodded slowly. I know, and that's exactly why it mattered. They pulled into the hotel's circle driveway. Before getting out, Tyler looked over. Is Brooke going to lose her job? The captain was quiet for a moment. I don't know. It's not up to me, but it's because of me. Tyler said. Reeves turned to face him. No, it's because of her choices. You didn't ask to be disrespected. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand anything. You carried yourself better than most adults would have. And in doing that, you gave every passenger on that plane a mirror. Tyler held his gaze, then slowly nodded. Inside the hotel lobby, Amanda was already waiting. She stood up the moment she saw him, pulling him into a hug that lasted longer than usual. I saw the video, she whispered. You were amazing. I didn't do anything, he murmured into her shoulder. You didn't have to, she said. They did it all themselves. Captain Reeves stood at a distance, watching the siblings quietly. He checked his phone one last time before heading toward the elevator. A new email from flight operations had arrived. Subject line board directive, Tyler Ridge formal recognition and internal review. He tapped it open, read the first few lines, and then closed it again. Whatever came next, it had already started. And the boy they once dismissed as too young to fly alone had just taken an entire airline to school. Not with force, not with anger, but by simply refusing to be less than who he was. The next morning, Tyler woke to find his phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in, not from strangers, but from classmates, instructors, aviation mentors, and even a few unfamiliar area codes. Most were short and supportive. Saw what happened. Proud of you. They know your name now, and they should. You handled that flight better than some full-grown pilots I've seen in action. Amanda sat on the hotel room couch, still in her hoodie, sipping coffee, her laptop open with a dozen tabs running. You're on 4 news sites, Tyler, she said without turning around. Local outlets picked it up first, but now national ones are covering it. They're quoting passengers from the plane. Someone even found an old post from your flight, school graduation, and linked it. Tyler rubbed the sleep from his eyes. That's not what I wanted, I know, Amanda replied. But this isn't about what you wanted anymore. It's about what they saw. He stared at the floor for a long moment. I didn't do anything special. Amanda finally turned to face him. Exactly, you didn't throw a fit. You didn't scream. You didn't ask for anything you hadn't already earned. That's what makes this so powerful. Tyler sat in silence, unsure how to respond. Then a knock came at the door. Captain Reeves stood in the hallway dressed in civilian clothes, now with a leather folder tucked under his arm. Hope. Him not too early, he said. Amanda opened the door wider to let him in. Reeves gave Tyler a firm nod. I just got off a call with the airline. They're requesting a meeting today. In-person CEO included. Tyler's expression didn't change much, but Amanda could tell it rattled him. Why me? Reeves shrugged slightly. They're not calling it discipline. They're calling it recognition. Quietly, they don't want cameras. No press, they just want to talk. Tyler leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. So they want me to be the face of their mistake. They want to keep from making it again, Reeves said carefully. But how you handle this, that's up to you. He'll be with you either way. By early afternoon, a black town car picked them up outside the hotel. The drive to the regional airline offices was silent, except for Amanda's quiet typing in the back seat. She was already drafting questions Tyler might be asked just in case. When they arrived, a senior representative named Monica Graves met them in the lobby, polished, polite, but not overly familiar. We appreciate you coming in, she said, offering a handshake to both Tyler and Amanda. They were led into a sleek conference room with glass walls and a long walnut table. Around it sat several familiar faces from the airlines. Top-tier executives from operations, training, customer relations, and safety CEO, Lauren Kessler sat at the far end, flanked by the head of compliance and legal counsel. Everyone stood when Tyler entered. He didn't flinch. He walked in slowly, pulled out a chair, and sat beside Captain Reeves. Amanda took the seat on his other side. Lauren spoke first. Mr. Ridge, let me start by saying, we're sorry. Tyler didn't nod. He didn't interrupt. He waited. She continued. What happened on Flight 417 was a failure not of paperwork or policy, but of judgment. Our crew failed to recognize both your credentials and your right to be treated with the same respect afforded to any passenger. You remained composed in a situation where many would not have, and in doing so, you revealed cracks we can't ignore. She turned slightly and a screen lit up on the far wall. It displayed a 3-slide presentation titled Operational Conduct Audit Phase 1. As of this morning, Lauren continued, we've begun rolling out mandatory review sessions for every crew member who interacts with passengers, starting with scenarios that involve minor students or credentialed trainees. This isn't reactive PR, it's the beginning of a hard reset. She paused. You have no obligation to speak here, Tyler. But if you're willing, Wed, like your input. Tyler looked around the room. Dozens of eyes, most belonging to people twice his age, waited on him. He took a breath. I don't want to be a spokesperson, he said calmly. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad. I just wanted to fly. That's all I've ever wanted. There was a beat of silence, Then he added, "But if what happened to me stops the next kid from being judged before they speak, then fine will help." Quietly, Monica scribbled a note. The compliance officer nodded. Lauren leaned forward. "You've already helped more than you know." After the meeting ended, several executives approached Tyler quietly, thanking him, offering business cards invitations to future training events. He accepted them with measured politeness, but tucked them away without a word. As they walked back to the car, Amanda nudged him lightly. "You just spoke to the people who run the airline like you've been doing this for years." "I have." Tyler replied. She smiled. "Not at that table, you haven't." He looked at her, then glanced toward Captain Reeves walking just ahead of them. "Well, maybe now I have." Behind them, from one of the tall glass windows, Lauren Kessler watched the three of them walk toward the curb. She turned to her assistant. "Keep an eye on that kid," she said, "because one day he's not going to be flying for us." The assistant looked confused. "You think he'll go to another airline?" Lauren shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, I think one day he's going to run one." That evening, back at the hotel, Tyler stood alone on the rooftop terrace, leaning against the railing, watching the distant airport lights blink steadily against the night sky. Each pulse, each sweep of a landing beam, reminded him of why he started. It had never been about uniforms or status. It was about the silence of the sky, the precision of motion, the way the world felt when you were above it all. Clear, focused, true. Behind him, the sliding glass door opened. Amanda stepped out quietly, a fresh soda in one hand. "You good?" she asked, handing him the can. Tyler nodded and took a sip but didn't turn around. "They want to fly me to Atlanta next week, headquarters. Full invitation." Amanda leaned beside him, brushing her hair back as the wind tugged at it. "You going?" I said. "I'd think about it." Amanda studied him for a moment. "Why do I get the feeling that you're not thrilled about all this attention?" He hesitated. "Because I'm not." She nodded, understanding. "You didn't ask to be the story. You just didn't duck out when it came for you." He looked at her eyes, tired. "I wanted the seat." "That's it, not a headline. Not a hashtag, just the seat I paid for. You didn't just hold the seat. Ty, you held your ground. That's what people are seeing." He didn't reply. Inside the hotel room, his phone vibrated again. This time it was an email from his mentor at the local aviation academy. "Mr. Vernon," it read, "saw the footage. You stayed the pilot even when they tried to make you. The passenger, proud of you. And by the way, the FAA regional director wants to meet." "I didn't arrange it." He reached out himself. Tyler set the soda down slowly. "Now the FAA wants to talk." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding. No regional director. They want to discuss youth inclusion initiatives and invite me to join some kind of advisory panel." His voice trailed off, half-dazed. Amanda let out a low whistle. "Okay, now you've crossed from weird into wild." They both laughed, finally a soft, tired laugh, shared between siblings caught in something much bigger than they had ever planned. But underneath the humor, Tyler's thoughts stayed anchored to the flight. The moment he was told he didn't belong, the cabin full of eyes, the silence that followed, he couldn't shake one question. What if he hadn't known how to stay calm? What if he hadn't had the training, or the backing, or the badge in his jacket? What if he'd been just another kid who looked out of place? Amanda must have sensed it. "You're thinking about what happens to the next kid who doesn't have a pilot for a guardian." He nodded. "Or the next one who's quieter, or smaller, or doesn't speak up." Amanda exhaled slowly. "Then maybe this meeting with the FAA, maybe it's not just about you." Inside, the news continued to cycle coverage of the story. One anchor used phrases like quiet dignity and symbol of resilience. Another panel debated corporate culture in the aviation industry, pointing to how policy and bias often meet at 35,000 feet. They didn't know Tyler had muted the TV hours ago. He didn't want to hear what strangers thought of him. He already knew who he was. Elsewhere, far from the hotel, in newsrooms, Brooke Winslow sat at her kitchen table in her small apartment. The overhead light flickering, her uniform jacket hung limply on the back of a dining chair. Still untouched from when she'd set it down that morning, in front of her was a single folded letter. She had received it just after landing, hand-delivered by a supervisor who hadn't said more than 5 words. The letter read, "Dear Ms. Winslow, following the formal review of Flight 417 and its associated passenger service conduct, We are placing you on administrative leave pending further evaluation. During this time, you are not permitted to serve on any domestic or international routes. You will be contacted by our compliance division regarding next steps. This is not a termination notice. However, your conduct has triggered a full audit of our onboard service training program, which will begin immediately. We encourage you to use this time to reflect. She read it twice, 3 times, but the final line was the one that stuck. We encourage you to use this time to reflect. She looked toward the window at the blinking lights of departing aircraft far above and realized something sharp she had never learned to reflect. Not really. She had memorized procedures, repeated protocols, corrected other crew members, but she had never paused to ask why she made the choices she did. Why she thought a boy in a first-class seat didn't belong there, or why her first instinct had been to correct instead of to ask. Now the airline was asking her to sit still and look inward, and she didn't know how. At the same time, on the edge of town, Captain Reeves sat alone in a quiet office at the Regional Training Center, reviewing paperwork. He had requested reassignment from flight duty for the next 3 days, not out of fatigue but intention. A folder on his desk bore the title, Program Development Pathway Expansion for Underrepresented Youth in Aviation. He had seen enough to know that Tyler's story shouldn't be a one-off. It needed to become a model, a map, and the next time a young passenger stepped into first class with quiet confidence, he didn't want there to be hesitation. He wanted that child greeted with 3 words, "Welcome aboard, Captain." 2 days later, Tyler sat across from a round table of FAA regional advisors in a sunlit boardroom that overlooked a small airfield outside Raleigh. The air was quiet, the atmosphere respectful. He wasn't here to be congratulated. He was here to be asked questions, real ones, the kind people usually reserve for adults with years of experience, not teenagers with clean notebooks and worn simulator gloves. Across from him sat Director Kent Holloway, a silver-haired man with 40 years in commercial aviation, known for being both old school and fiercely protective of the rules that kept skies safe. He studied Tyler through wire-rimmed glasses. "You've flown simulators in fog, crosswinds, emergency resets," Holloway said. "But none of that prepared you for what happened on that flight, and yet you handled it better than some people who've flown for decades." Tyler looked down briefly, then met his gaze. "I didn't think I was handling anything. I just didn't want to give anyone a reason to say I didn't belong." One of the advisors, a younger woman named Karina Nguyen, leaned forward. "But that's the point. You shouldn't have had to carry that weight." "No one should," Tyler nodded. "But some of us do, especially when we're the only one in the room who looks like us." That line held the room in a long pause. Holloway finally exhaled. "We're working on a youth advisory panel, not a PR stunt. Real access. I'd like you to consider chairing it. Not because of what happened, but because you know what's missing." Tyler blinked. "Chair it." "But I'm only 15, Holloway gave a small, dry smile. "You're 15, and somehow you already understand what this industry forgets every few years." Tyler didn't answer right away, but he didn't say no. Meanwhile, back at the airline's training facility, a different meeting took place in a much less polished room. Brooke Winslow sat in a cold metal chair across from 2 internal compliance officers and a human resources representative. Her appearance was neat. Her voice controlled, but her eyes gave her away, redrimmed, slightly sunken. She hadn't been sleeping. They handed her a copy of her own report. She didn't reach for it. "Brooke," said the woman from HR gently, "do you understand why we're here?" Brooke's voice cracked slightly. "Because I made a mistake." "That's not the full story," said the lead compliance officer, a tall man in his 50s. "It's not just the array, it's the pattern. We have statements from passengers and other crew who've noticed behavior that suggests you tend to act before verifying facts, especially with young or non-traditional passengers." Brooke's face tightened. "I didn't mean to treat him badly." "I thought you assumed," the HR rep said softly. Brooke flinched at the word. "I didn't think a kid that young belonged in first class alone. That's all." The silence that followed was thick. "And when you learned who he was?" the compliance officer asked. Brooke swallowed. "I still thought it was a setup, that someone was helping him fake it." The room shifted slightly. The woman from HR closed her notebook gently. "That's what this comes down to. Brooke, not the incident itself, but your inability to adjust your thinking, even after new information was presented. That's the training you skipped. That's the failure we can't overlook anymore. They handed her a 2-page document. Her hands trembled as she took it. The heading, final employment, termination, voluntary option available. She stared at it for a long time. You can resign today with severance, said the compliance officer, or continue the review and let it go to final judgment. But either way, your flight status is suspended indefinitely. Brooke nodded slowly, her lips pressed tightly together. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just folded the paper, once placed it in her bag, and stood to leave. Outside the training center parking lot, buzzed with early spring heat, and for the first time in a decade, she didn't have a badge around her neck. Across the city, Captain Reeves stood at the front of a new trainee orientation. A fresh batch of recruits sat in front of him, eager, nervous notebooks open. He spoke plainly. There are a lot of rules you'll learn here, safety. Rules, technical rules, company policies. But the most important thing you'll carry into the air is this. Don't assume. Ask, listen, learn. He paused. You can teach someone how to push buttons and run checklists, but you can't teach respect if someone isn't willing to see others clearly. If that's you, you'll learn fast. If it's not, you won't last here long. No one moved, no one looked down, and in the back row, one of the recruits raised his hand. Sir, are the stories about Tyler Ridge. True Reeves didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Every word back at the hotel. Amanda opened the door to their room and found Tyler seated on the bed, rereading an email. His expression was unreadable. What is it? She asked. He turned the screen toward her. It was from the president of a regional airline alliance. We'd like to invite you to speak at this year's Aviation Youth Leadership Summit topic, Earning the Seat. Amanda leaned against the wall, shaking her head in awe. You going to do it? Tyler stared at the email. I think I have to, and maybe he did. Not for the attention, not for the headlines, but because once you've sat in a seat that people told you didn't belong to you and proved that it always did, you don't walk away from it. You invite someone else to sit there, too. Months later, Tyler Ridge walked through the doors of a packed auditorium at the Aviation Youth Leadership Summit wearing a simple navy blazer. No pilot stripes, no flashy introductions. He didn't need them. Everyone already knew who he was not because he'd shouted, but because he had. The lights dimmed and the crowd settled as his name was announced. He stepped up to the podium, placed his notes down, and looked out across a sea of young faces. Students, trainees, dreamers, many of whom had been told they weren't ready, didn't belong, or were too much or not enough. He began quietly the same way he had on that flight. When I was 15, I got removed from my seat, not because I didn't pay for it, not because I broke a rule, but because someone saw me and assumed I shouldn't be there. A few people nodded. Some already knew this part. Others were hearing it for the first time. But here's the thing, you don't need to prove your worth by yelling. You prove it by staying steady when everything around you shakes, by knowing what seat you've earned and sitting in it. Even if someone tells you to get up. He paused, scanning the room. And when they try to move you out of that seat, don't just fight for it. Hold it until someone else who looks like you, sounds like you, dreams like you can sit in theirs without question. The applause was slow at first, then grew, not wild, not dramatic, but meaningful. A room full of young pilots stood on their feet, not just for Tyler, but for what his presence reminded them of. That respect isn't given, it's noticed. And once it is, it spreads. Outside the auditorium, a new class of junior flight students prepared for simulator practice. On every training badge, a quiet addition had been made in bold lettering, credentialed, welcome aboard. As Tyler stepped off the stage, Captain Reeves waited with his arms folded, pride in his expression. Amanda stood just behind him, recording quietly this time, not for the world to see, but for them to remember Tyler didn't need a seat in first class anymore. He had claimed something bigger. He had changed how people saw the cockpit. This wasn't just a story about a flight. It was about how we treat those who dare to dream bigger than we expect. If this story touched you, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real powerful stories like this one.